This is day 164, Principles of Creativity. When I was young, probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom had a book lying around the house called Confessions of an Advertising Man by David Ogilvy. Truth be told, this book probably caught my attention because of the few partially nude advertisements Ogilvy had highlighted in it. However, curiosity led me to read the book several times, in fact. David Ogilvy is one of the most famous marketing executives of our modern era. I would place him on the same level as P.T. Barnum in terms of his influence on how we think about advertising. Before founding his agency, Ogilvy worked in British intelligence during World War II and held some rather typical jobs growing up, door-to-door sales, for example. He was even a chef at one point before landing a role at a market research agency. Eventually, in 1948, he co-founded an advertising firm that would become legendary. He's the man who helped put Rolls-Royce on the map with the iconic line, "At 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Rolls-Royce comes from the electric clock." That headline catapulted Ogilvy into the spotlight in the advertising world. Over the following decades, he was behind many of the most iconic brands and campaigns. Many consider him the father of modern advertising. This book, along with his later work, Ogilvy on Advertising in 1983, became highly influential among those who considered themselves creatives. What's interesting is that long before the rise of social media influencers, there was David Ogilvy. He was a master of the same tactics your average TikTok poster uses today, except he did it with research, discipline, and strategic brilliance. What I find fascinating is how Ogilvy's work helped transform advertising and marketing messaging into a true creative enterprise, a place where creative minds could find meaningful, impactful work. His books are still worthy reads, even though they were published over half a century ago. It's amazing how relevant and applicable his concepts remain when it comes to the creative art of selling a message. More importantly, Ogilvy's ideas offer a foundation for understanding the true principles of creativity. If you want to make a career or even a life out of being creative, Ogilvy is one of the best places to start. One of the most important principles that governed his work and that of his agency was a deep respect for the audience, the consumer. This wasn't always the case in advertising. Before pioneers like Ogilvy, marketers often ignored or underestimated their audience. Today, we throw around terms like ICP or ideal customer profile as if it's an obvious first step. But historically, marketing didn't always begin with the customer in mind. Here's the reality every creative must face. Your creations will amount to nothing unless they resonate with your audience. Ogilvy was famous for saying, "The consumer isn't a moron, she's your wife." It was a reminder to never condescend in your messaging. Cleverness means nothing if it insults the people you're trying to persuade. At the time, this was revolutionary in thinking. There was a paradox in the industry. Male advertising executives were essentially mocking or ignoring the very consumer who made most of the household purchasing decisions. Ogilvy had to wake people up. If you want to sell a product, you must appeal to the person actually making the decision, in this case, women. Ogilvy was also funny. He had an amazing sense of humor and used it often in his work, but he was quick to point out that the advertiser's job is to sell the product, not just to entertain. I think today's Super Bowl ad culture could learn something from him. Sure, it's fun to watch actors dance around in silly outfits, but if you're not heading to Dunkin' Donuts the next morning, then the ad just didn't do its job. In our current era, we've forgotten some of Ogilvy's core messages. The focus should always be on the message, not the medium. What exactly is Dunkin's message based on their Super Bowl ads? I'm not sure I could tell you. Ogilvy would likely argue that if you're not selling more donuts and coffee, then your ad isn't creative. It might be entertaining, but that's not the same thing. Creativity, according to Ogilvy, is a purpose-driven exercise, and it's what makes advertising magical. When we focus on what we're saying, when we put substance over style, our creative ideas really carry weight. When you send a message into the world, you want to knock it out of the park. not just bunt and hope it reaches first base. Ogilvy emphasized that the most powerful creative work is always backed by research. You can only be truly creative when you have maximum insight. A great example of this principle in action is the Dove campaign for Real Beauty. It's one of the most successful and impactful ad campaigns of all time. You can go on YouTube and check out the ad. Even decades later, this ad is still relevant and compelling. I'm a man who uses the cheapest and harshest chemicals on my skin, but after watching this video, I feel compelled to buy Dove, not just to take care of myself, but to champion real beauty in a world obsessed with artificial appearances. That ad worked because the team behind it did their homework. They understood their customers and what mattered to them. Their creativity was grounded in discipline, strategy, and respect for the audience. This was persuasion, not out of manipulation, but out of a genuine desire to understand people and craft messages that met their needs. Creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires involvement with the world around you. And to succeed, you have to follow the principles that Ogilvy knew so well.